Hello, and welcome to the Our Parking Industry podcast. I'm Krista Olien, and I am here with Clyde Wilson and Leigh Thomas. Today, we will be discussing accountability. So, we have had a previous discussion with Mr. Ed Travers from Boston Properties, BXP, about accountability, but we want to have an internal discussion about what accountability means to our team. So, our company was founded on auditing parking operations. Auditing, we've talked about it, can be a dirty word. But all it really means is really verifying that accountability is taking place on behalf of the owners and on behalf of the people that are managing the parking itself. So we will jump into some questions. I wanted to kick us off by really referring back to Clyde's rules to live by. One of the rules to live by of the parking network is know your numbers, and that is the key to accountability. Back in the old days, we'll say, whenever parking was a really heavy cash business, the accountability was really on is that cash that's being collected on site making it to the bank, therefore making it to the owners. That has really changed, and we are on the forefront of an even bigger change in that realm because no longer are facilities accepting cash. Like every day, we hear about a facility transitioning away from cash collection completely. So now the accountability is really looking different in the fact that is the money that is being collected digitally making it to the owner's bank account. So Clyde, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit, but what have you seen in your history in the industry and this big transition we're going through?
Well, I think the most important thing is that traditionally we were always thought of because we were cash. We always thought that the revenue loss was theft, and we generally found theft in almost every audit that we did. But theft was almost always never the really large amount of money that was missing. Traditionally, over time, um, we developed some kind of very standard things that we looked for because um, we knew that the revenue that was missing due to, again, a transition. We're going through a transition now. We went through one before, from cash to credit card to electronic validations. And all that happened was the theft moved over to poor management practices because everybody was still trying to figure out how to manage this new way of handling parking transactions. And we didn't have accounts receivable systems there that could properly handle um, monthly parking billing. Something that Krista and I think Trina, were just on a phone call last week with a parking operator about that exact thing that was a problem for the last 25 years. And it still is today. This lack of understanding of the wording within building office contracts that can cause you to miss billing at all or the correct amount. So that was a transition. Well, we just moved into another one. Now we're moving into a new level of transition where a very large amount of the money now, more and more every day, is being collected through electronic means, not through the site, which means the accountability is much more difficult, not easier. I think we're seeing this move today to where it's still the same as it was kind of in that transition from cash to credit card in the early days of electronic, but it's just on a much bigger scale now because the people who have access to the money have access to a lot. And the people who are responsible for managing it are not tech geniuses. It was pretty easy. It was pretty easy for a Clyde Wilson to figure out how to count to 10 and know I'm supposed to have 10 and 9 was not good, right? but, but today that's totally different because there are so many people's hands on the revenue stream, and not all of them are from the day-to-day accountability of the parking management office. So today, I've been through doing parking audits for 25 years. I'm more concerned about it today than I ever was.
So in an effort to ensure accountability, one of the things that I have been thinking of recently is that it used to be kind of a three-layer process. The parker would come onto into the parking facility. They would pay the parking attendant, the operator. That parking attendant, then the group of the parking attendants, the operators, were responsible for making sure that that cash went into the bank because it was a pure cash business. Now we have the parker coming in, the attendant being responsible that the parker had already prepaid through a third-party vendor that they're going to pay on site with cash if they still accept cash, and possibly pay on site through a credit card. So the layers have just gotten so thick. So how can an operator or the people that are responsible to business management and ownership, how can those parking operators maintain that accountability whenever they really only see one physical piece of it if they still collect cash? Other than that, it might seem like it's out of their hands. So what can the team do, or what can the group do in conjunction with building ownership to maintain that accountability?
Absolutely great and most timely question, because we as a group, this parking network group, we've already seen, I want to say this in a nice way, we've already seen certain people within the parking industry trying to play hands off with that revenue over there. And that's going to be a long-term problem, because if you're the parking operator and there's $5 million being collected, you're responsible for all of it. You can't push some of it over there and say, well, no, it's them. That's those guys that were collecting the money. It went through their bank account. It's really not. So, the single biggest challenge I think we're going to have is and I'm not seeing it yet, the parking operator is understanding that their role has changed and that the people that work for them has changed. And they are going to have to, well, and it's something that it just came up actually with us in the last couple of days, the data processing agreement.
Mm-hmm.
That's a move to throw the responsibility off on somebody else. But that's a move that says, we're recognizing there could be a shortfall here, and you're going to sign this agreement if you're going to handle my money.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting that has just popped up just in the last few days to this group of people, because it's a very fortuitous as we move forward and start looking at. I mean, today, just 5 years ago, basically, a parking operator controlled 100% of the revenue in a parking garage.
Yep.
Even if you were using Paris accounts receivable, Paris was just a processing system. The merchant of record was still the parking operator.
It was a tool.
It was a tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the merchant of record was the parking operator, so they were responsible. How many merchants of records do we have now in the average parking garage that we are responsible for?
We've seen 6, maybe even close to 8 sometimes.
Yes. And so you as a parking operator not only have to be sure that you're accountable for yourself, you got to figure out how you're going to be accountable for those people and how you're going to manage them. And we certainly haven't seen it happening yet. I'm sure it will, but at some point might want to be sooner rather than later. But that's a big issue, which is why I said a couple of minutes ago, I'm more concerned today than I ever was. Sally stealing $150 every now and then in cash, we thought was terrible and got all upset about it. Sally's going to be nothing compared to what we already are beginning to think we see and what's coming. down the road. So accountability has always been a major part of our job. It's just like you said earlier, get the tickets on the cars and the money in the bank. That's our job. But how we do it is about to get really, really complicated. So we as a parking industry better get really, really complicated with it.
It's a sharp learning curve.
It is. They all are. Look,
Yeah.
these kind of things happen in every industry out there. It's not us. I see it everywhere I look. So it's not just us. Go ahead, Leigh.
Well, just in this transition, and Krista, all the layers that our operators and managers have to deal with, that makes me think of the podcast that we recorded with Ed, and he really honed in on that idea, and he said that if we are going to be accountable, we have to really know our weaknesses. We have to know the things that we're not good at, because your choices are either turn away and ignore it or be accountable. And so if you know that your facility is not good at something, or your management team is not good at something, or you yourself are not good at something, you really need to take the responsibility to find the resources that will help you take care of the thing so that you can still be accountable, even though there's a lack of understanding.
I agree with that.
Very,
So
very
one
important.
of
That's right.
one of the things that this kind of brings to mind, just that word accountability. We use it in our personal lives, but we also use it in our professional lives. So if I'm just thinking about accountability from like a personal level, let's take, I don't know, fitness, for example. I don't know. If I'm thinking about accountability for fitness, if I cannot do it personally, I am either looking for someone to help me. I'm looking for someone to maybe go work out with, or go on a walk with, to help me maintain that accountability to myself, but then I also feel a responsibility to them. Or you can hire a personal trainer. So then you have to be there, because you're paying for it. So you have to be accountable to them because you don't want to be wasting your money. So there's just, the application goes so wide, and I think it can also go both directions. So the ownership of the building or of the property or facility is accountable to the people that they hire to operate the parking, and vice versa. The people that operate the parking are accountable to the people that own the facility. So that understanding of the weaknesses both directions, I think, is really important as well. It's an important piece.
Yes, it is. It's a terribly important piece. And as you were talking there, it was really making me think about us and the parking network and how we put ourselves in a position to help everyone with this. Because I maybe at least at this point more than you guys am out there talking to people all over the place. Even though you guys just were at a convention here just recently, and when you're talking to them now, as I more than ever today, and paying attention to what the words they use and how they say things, and you begin to realize how this current group is in a transition, and so many of the top level managers still have not made the transition to, there's a new level of accountability out there that we're going to have to deal with, and we better learn how to deal with this because I'm not seeing that one. So it's always interesting in a business, and it's I think maybe more interesting to some degree for me because I went through this business through so many years where it was really slow to change, and now it's changing really, really fast, and I think it's doing a great job. But this accountability issue, but because of the multi layers that we talked about a few minutes ago on a site that may have 6 or 8 people um, that are responsible for different types of revenue, and a parking operation that really hasn't yet become the understanding of how to manage that many groups. And so they have a lot to do. I'm fully confident they'll pull it off, but it's going to take some very drastic reorganization of um, our industry and how it moves forward. And the accountability, like Ed was talking about, Ed's an internal auditor. So he sees it from an internal auditor's perspective, which is great for us to listen to somebody with that perspective. Um, and we then are that second tier of audit where we're kind of in the middle between the internal auditor, Ed, over here, and the operator over here. We're in the middle, and it's our responsibility to keep Ed informed and to check on these guys. And it's also our responsibility, and I think we're doing a good job of this as I see other people around the country. It is as much our responsibility to go out like we're going to do as a team next week to audit a site. It's as much our responsibility uh, to look at the industry and see the failures that are going to cause us to find an audit. An audit problem. I always thought it was funny as we were doing this because there are two kind of groups of auditors out there, and we certainly have them both still today. There's the group of auditors that I've always hoped we were. That was the group that could go look and do our job and make our finding, help the operator get it solved. There's the other group of people out there doing what we do that are hoping they go find a whole big pile of audit problems. So for us, we look at the way we look at it, we're there to help them. This has changed. Here's some of the things you got to look at to manage this better and do this. The other people that are out there auditing aren't really interested in teaching change to anybody. They're interested in making big findings. And so I like the position we are in and have always been in since the founding of the Parking Hour. We're here to help, but that puts responsibility on us as a group to be sure we're out there learning where the weaknesses are. Mm-hmm. And I think at this point, we have done a good job of that. We are really internally talk a lot about some of the weaknesses that we're seeing that have sprung up in the new parking industry that we have today.
But I like something that you said there. When we acknowledge our weakness, sometimes radical change has to happen in order for us to be accountable. But I want to add to that. Sometimes it's radical, but then also it is always intentional. We have to be intentional.
Very important. Yeah.
To stay responsible for our responsibilities. And I'm thinking of a location that I'm working with right now. One of their policies, I was asking, tell me how this works. And the operator said something like, well, it's just the way it's always been done. And when he heard himself say that, he said, oh, I really need to get this managed better. And so sure enough, within about a 2-month time, that brave operator had taken a policy that just really wasn't meeting the needs, and he revamped it, and now he is managing it. He is intentionally imposing his will on his facility so that he can be accountable. And it's a lot of work.
Yeah, one of the spectacular things about that is that he probably would not have done that if you wouldn't have asked the question. So that's one of our important roles coming and stepping in to help, is that we ask the questions that nobody really asks. Nobody really goes out and asks about, because we want to know, why are things the way they are, or how does this work, instead of, I just do this every day, this is how I do it, and you just get in a rhythm, and things get handed down from the person before you to you, and it's just done. But if you go in and you are the person kind of mixing it up a little bit and asking the question, real change can come about, like you saw at your location. That's really awesome.
That was a great analogy, because it's so true in everything that we do in business and in life. We fall into the trap of doing the same thing all the time and not really thinking through that things have changed and maybe there's a better way to do it. But that also tells you it's very much a part of our job as the parking network to sit back and look for those things. It's a help to everybody. That's what a third party always does.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that go out there and beat themselves up every day to manage something, if it's parking or if it's my auto shop down the road or whatever they do every day. They do that every day, and they are tired at the end of the day. It's always good. It's hard for you, but it's always good to have that person comes in that's nice and not critical,
Mm-hmm.
like we have really tried very hard to be, and say, well, did you ever really think maybe we could do this way and do it in a nice way? And let's try it and see what happens. And I it's interesting because that's probably a bigger part of business management than almost any single task. That being that oversight.
I think another piece of that is that maybe the job was being done, like the request was being met, but whenever you came in and you kind of questioned how it was being met or the processes that were being done, it took that and it raised his accountability level. He wanted to be more accountable. He wanted it to
He
be
wanted to
better.
be, right?
And so it pushed him a little bit just through a simple question. So I love that, is that it changed his internal accountability to want to do better. His boss didn't come tell him to change it. Your question spurred him on, and that's how you know you have a good parking operator, is if they take that upon themselves.
Yes, very much. It's really interesting. This is, as we've talked many times, a very complicated business with a lot of moving parts, and with so many moving parts, it's it's difficult to help everybody have the level of understanding. And it's, as you were telling that story, I was thinking about something that we've talked about before. Um, in parking audits, one of our questions in our questions of managers is, I think it's actually in the RFI, is can you share with us the operating procedures for several different tasks?
Mm-hmm.
And every now and then we actually find them, but they're pretty deep in dust because they've not been touched. And a good bit of the time, nobody really knows where they are. And the procedures were written 20 years ago when somebody asked about them the last time, and somebody said, well, we better write these procedures. So they did it and then put it on the shelf. So that was always a challenge for them because they didn't. So what would happen is the real operating procedures were the handed down operating procedures. So it follows the same thing. We've talked about this before. It's like when you have people in a classroom and you go over here to the first person at the desk and you tell them a story. And then their job is to turn around and tell the next one. And that story is supposed to move around the room until it comes out the other end over here, a totally different story. Well, that's how parking is managed. Johnny managed it, handed it down to Sheila. Sheila took everything she learned from Johnny as best she could, and then Sheila handed it down to Ricky. And it got handed down and changed every time
Yeah.
the message got moved to another person. How you did things changed until, guess who? Until Leigh and Krista walked in the door.
One of the things we talked about with Ed was the idea of our main client, one of our main clients is Class A office buildings. So
Right.
there's a standard to uphold, and accountability is a piece that feeds into that standard. So we haven't really talked about this side of it, but what is the accountability of the parking operator to the customer service piece of those customers that are parking in the garage? Because they are the tenants in the building. So the parkers are typically the tenants in those Class A office buildings. So what is the accountability process as far as customer service, and how does that play into it? We've talked about revenue a lot, but customer service accountability is important also.
I think customer service is kind of a funny thing because it's the one thing of what we do in the parking industry. It's the one thing that our clients notice.
Mm-hmm.
The financial accountability, those other things kind of over there, the client doesn't notice that, but the client notices if you don't take out the trash and you leave somebody throws crap out of their car on the third level below and it's not picked up, and if the equipment's not working, your client knows that. So I've always thought we didn't do a great job every time, but I always thought we did a better job at that because we're responsible for it. But that's something that the client really knows how to oversee us for,
Mm-hmm.
and to where the other things, our client may not be as aware of the individual transactions. But that's a great question because it's our responsibility. We manage the garage. We're hired and paid to manage the garage.
And
So, yes,
those pieces are tangible. The cleanliness, the ease of the parker, those types of things, the ease of access, those things are very tangible and
yes,
very people like to talk about those things. People are the information, the revenue on the page is privy to certain members of, but everybody can see what your garage looks like, how it
right,
feels to drive in there, how it feels to park there. Is it easy? Is it
right,
difficult? Those,
right.
all of those things, those are right in front of your face. So they're a lot more tangible than the revenue numbers. So
Well, and I think the customer service soft skills are also a part of this accountability conversation. The social responsibility we have to each other, the standard of being kind, the standard of acknowledging when you make a mistake and doing everything you can to make it right. I think that's another set of ways that our operators are accountable to the customers.
Right. Yeah, very, very much. We are responsible to make sure that the customer has a good experience. And if they don't have a good experience, it is traditionally because we didn't take care of the equipment. We didn't do something to help the customer do better. Um, it was generally fell on our responsibilities. That's probably something I could tell stories about all day
we have a stories from the road coming up. We'll
long.
save that one. One of the other pieces I was thinking about is what we do. So TPN goes in and we do financial and operational reviews. Notice we don't just do financial reviews, we also do operational reviews. So
Right.
to help preserve and maintain and improve that accountability standard, we don't just look at the numbers on the page, even though they are important. We also look at the operation itself and what can be done to improve that, to maintain that high level standard that every facility is looking for. I don't think there's a facility out there that's like, we'll do the minimum today. I don't think that happens. So we want to come in and help acknowledge those parts that can show improvement on the operational side as well.
Right. Well, it's just a part of that third party oversight to where you come in from the outside and look at something they've been doing every day. And they traditionally like to feel like they're doing a good job. But when the third party oversight comes in, you may see it that they're doing a good job, but things have changed and maybe you want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And generally they take that pretty well. Um, we always, and I, I don't really remember whether this was just personality, but from the very beginning, I always saw all those things as our responsibility. And I can remember the struggle that I had internally as we were trying to become an auditor and how to, a professional auditor has a certain line that they follow on how they do things. And I never wanted to do that. And I think over time, then it really helped us to set ourselves aside as being looking at things in a little bigger light. It's like I think I told one of you guys recently, we were doing an audit, and this was actually for Ed, but it was many years ago. Um, and Ed required at the time, we were between CPAs. So the parking network did not have a CPA on staff, but we had one. We had actually had two at one time. And Ed had a job that we had to do. I don't remember what the job was, but he required that we have a CPA on our audit.
Sure.
So I went out and hired, I won't say, oh boy, I almost said it. I won't say the name of the company, but it's one of the more popular national audit companies. And we worked with them for about 3 weeks until I had just had enough, because they were so traditionally audit minded, and we took a much bigger view of this. And the other thing I think that pissed me off a lot was their fee was like 3 times more than ours. So I got to the point where I just had enough. This wasn't the style of audit I wanted to do, CPA or not. So I got on a plane, flew to Chicago, had a meeting scheduled with that company's corporate office, and went in and said, "Sorry, guys, you're fired." I fired the national audit company just because I didn't think their style was helping us with this very important client and the operation that we had to audit. So anyway, interesting business. But now we're in this tremendous transition, and I think our job not only is more challenging as we're doing the job, our job is more challenging than I've ever seen it in trying to keep up with all of how this change secretly behind the door can impact our clients, and we would never see it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So it comes back to knowing your numbers, because if you do not know the numbers of your location and what they should look like, you will not be able to recognize a problem in your accountability standards. So going back to the rules to live by, if you don't know your numbers, you will not be able to catch or acknowledge those problems that you face. Leigh, did you have anything else?
No, this was fun. Thanks for chatting, guys.
It was fun. This was really an interesting one, because I think it's so current to the challenges that we're having every day, as not only our customers are trying to understand the changes that are impacting their parking operation, the people that we audit, the parking operators and the parking managers are trying to deal with this change. But we have such a tremendously bigger job of trying to stay in front of this and be sure we don't get caught and miss something of something that's happening out there with all of these 6 or 8 people that all have access to different portions of the revenue at one garage. Something we've just never dealt with before.
Absolutely.
Accountability is a great subject.
Yeah. So in our parking industry, we always like to go back to that. The layers are getting thick. And so we like to keep having these conversations to help provide the knowledge and resources that this podcast is geared towards, so that we can be a voice in the industry for people like you. So we hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Our Parking Industry podcast.
Thank you so much.